Hi everybody, welcome to BI Land. Probably most of you have heard that earlier is one of the most difficult DAX functions. Its interpretation can be tricky and misleading sometimes. So let's see in 4 practical examples how we can use earlier. I'll provide you full explanation to understand it once and for all. Ready? Let's go. Okay. Basically, earlier is used to retrieve the values of outer row context when there are multiple nested contexts. And we mostly use earlier in calculated columns. In our examples, to achieve our final goal, we wouldn't necessarily need to use earlier. We could use measures, variables, or even changing a little bit in our model. But we are going to use earlier to see and understand it fully so that when we have to use earlier, we are totally at ease with the function. Let's see our first example. Let's go to data part. Here I have a table. It is basically year and oil production for different countries. This is country code. In our first example, we want to be able to, for each country, like for example, if I choose country code 24, I believe it is Angola. We want to see for each row, for the prior years, what was the maximum oil production. First off, already we are in a calculated column, which means that we are already in a row context. And I want to see for each year, for each line for this country, for example, year 2020, what was the maximum oil production for all of the years before 2020? It means that when I'm going to compare this year, when I'm in this line, I'm going to compare 2020 to all of the years prior to 2020, which means 2019 all the way down to 1965. To do that comparison, I need to introduce another row context, which means that I have to be able to compare 2020 for the other years and look at the oil production and bring the maximum oil production in those years. To be able to go out of this line and compare it to this column, I'm going to introduce the new context using filter inside the calculate function. Basically, when I'm using filter for this year, I'm introducing another context to be able to compare it with this row when I'm iterating for each row. So let's create this new column. We can call it probably prior high record based on country. So here we are based on country. We want to state for each country. I want to see for this country prior to this row what was the highest production. Because we want to see the highest production, I'm going to use calculate max oil production, which is the oil production of the column. If I hit enter, there's going to be nothing changed because we are just calculating oil production, and for each row it's going to bring me the same number here. If I hit enter, I'm going to see the same number that is here for each row. I want to be able to compare 2020 and find for prior years and find the oil production of the prior years and then bring the maximum for this line. For that, I'm going to introduce filter on the same table of the oil stats, and in my filter function, I'm going to say I want year column. This is our next row context, second context or new context, and I'm going to say compare this to my previous context, to the year of the row. And that I'm going to bring it with the earlier. Earlier means that the year that I'm looking at in this row. It is the outer context. It is the first context that we are in, which is the row of the table. And I want to see the year to be greater than all of the years. Basically, this function now, this part filter part here, is telling me that for each row, look at the year column and compare all the years that are smaller than the year in this row. So if I hit enter, it's going to give us some number, but it's going to be wrong still. Why? Because right now we are only saying that in our filter, only compare year to year, which means that it is going to look at all of the oil production for other countries also. It is going to bring me the maximum from other countries. But I don't want to have the maximum of oil production from other countries. I want to stay, when I go to the outer context, I want to stay in the same country, which means that I want country in the second and first context to be the same thing. If we provided this information that the year should be smaller than the year of the row, I need to provide that the country should be the same as the other context. So for that, I'm going to add another filter. And inside this filter, we are still in oil table. And I'm going to say now, I want the country code of the context that is introduced by filter to be the same country code of the context of our earlier context, which is the row itself. And here I'm gonna say ISO. And now our calculation looks good. If I hit enter, I see that we are in line 2020. It's going to look all of the years before 2020, which means 2019 to 1965, through this filter. And through this filter, I am staying in the same country. So all of the lines that it's going to look at from 2019 to 1965, it's going to be in the same country. Then it is going to look for the maximum oil production. Therefore, when I am in 2020, it's going to look at 2019 and what is the oil production? So this number. 2018, what is the oil production? This number. And it's going to look all the way down and it's going to find the max from here down here. What is the max that it found? It's 1876. It corresponds to this line. So I bring this production here. I could bring year here, but that would add another just parameter in this table, in this calculation, sorry. So it means that my previous highest record before 2020 was happening year 2008 with this production. So it brings it here. For the second line, when I'm in 2019, it is going to look at all of the years from 2018 to 1965. What is the biggest production? It is still the same year because 2008 is still in the range that we are looking at. So it's going to bring this up to the year 2009 because the year 2008 was in the range that I was looking. So from year 2020 to year 2009, higher record is going to be the record that is in 2008. When we are in 2008, what is the previous record? So we are going to look at 2008 until 1965 and find the maximum. What was the maximum prior to 2008? It is 1655. So I'm going to bring 1655 here. When I'm in 2007, what was the number? It's 1401. I'm going to bring 1401 here, and etc. Then we see again repetition because prior to 2004, I have the maximum number of 905, but it's the same for 2003 also because this 905 happened in 2002 and it is the highest value because it is bigger than the number in 2003. So it brings to 905 for both of them. And it's the same thing for the rest. Another example, we are in year 1983. I'm looking for all of the numbers from 1982 down to 1965. I find the maximum number. It happens to be this number, 173, from year 74. It means that from year 83 to year 74, I'm going to bring this number here. And the same. And last line, because there is no prior year, it's going to be empty. And this is our first example. Let's jump into our second example. Let me make some space here. We have now more space. I can make also, I'm going to change this format to decimal number. Okay, now it's better. This time we are going to see the ranking for each year. It means that if I choose like year 2020, I want to see the ranking of each country for the production. So I'm going to take the filter out of country, and this time I want to be able to filter over a year, let's say 2010. I want to see oil production, which is here, oil production to be ranked from the first biggest number to the smallest number for the lines that have the oil production in the first place. How we can do that? Basically, the concept of ranking is counting for each row the number of rows that are bigger than this number, and that way we can have the rank of this row. So we see that we need earlier, because if I want to count number of rows, I need to be able to get out of my current context to be able to compare and count. So let's create our new column. We can call it ranking, this time over year. I'm just gonna put here. And first off, we said that we want when there is oil production. So I'm gonna start with saying if not is blank. The value that we don't want to be blank is the oil production. So the column oil production. So if it's not blank, now our calculation. As I said, ranking is the counting rows that have bigger production than the current row. I'm going to calculate count rows. The table that I'm going to count row is the same table, oil stat. And I'm going to introduce filter to be able to use the second context. So filter provides me the second row context, and it's going to be the same table. And what we want is the oil production. The oil production. So here the filter provides me a column of values for my context that I want to compare my production of our current row. To be able to compare my oil production for each row, I need to introduce earlier function to be able to go to the outer row context and have the value of each row. So I want value of each row to be smaller than the values provided by the filter function. This is our first filter. Basically, we are saying that we want to look at oil production of the row and compare it to the oil production that filter function provides me, and see how many lines are bigger than this current row. For example, if I am in 2000, we are in year 2010, and I'm looking at the oil production. I am in the first non-blank row. I'm going to count number of lines that the oil production is bigger than 77. This 77 is going to be the value inside this earlier, and this is the filter providing us the column of the values of the oil production. Like our previous example, I need to be precise that I want to stay in the same year because I want the ranking to be for 1 year. So I don't want to be ranking oil production from 2009 to oil production to 2019. For that, I want to say filter over the same table, fstat oil. I want that the year column that new context provides me to be exactly the same as earlier. This way we are sure that we are staying in the same year. So if I hit enter, I'm going to have my ranking. For example, this is 1. 1 means that how many lines were bigger or equal to this production. There's only 1, which is itself, which means that the ranking is 1. For ranking 2, I see for this one, 9864, how many lines were bigger or equal to this number? It is itself and this line here. So it's ranking 2nd. The same thing for the rest. And we see that I think the biggest number is 47. And it means that we don't have numbers smaller than 77. As we see, there's no number smaller than 77. So we are counting 47 lines that are bigger than 77. This is our second example. Now let's dive into our third example. We are going to make the percentage of the production. We want to know what percentage is the production for each country in a certain year over the whole production for that year. It's kind of grouping. Basically, when I'm in this line, I want to see this number is what percent of the total oil production for this year 2010. So how we can do that? And again, in another context, we would do this with measure, simply just the percentage of the total. But here we want to learn earlier. So let's create our new column. I'm going to call this percentage over year. And let's do this with variable. I'm just gonna introduce variable group oil production. And this is calculate sum of the oil production. Here I am going to introduce filter function to have the second row context. Filter, the table is the same oil table. And the column we are interested in is the year column. What I want is that this year column to be equal to earlier, the outer context year column. So what this means is that when I am in a certain line, like this line, the context inside the earlier is going to give me 2010, and inside this part, which is scanning over the year column, is going to scan the years that are equal to 2010, and it is going to sum all of the oil production that is 2010. So I'm providing 2010. For all of these lines, it meets the condition. So it is going to sum all of these lines. So if we return here only oil production, it is going to give me the sum of this column. So let's hit enter. These numbers that are repeated through all lines are the sum of this oil production. This is our basic total. What we want is not the total, we want the percentage of this number for each line. So we can easily add oil production from oil table divided by this total. And I don't need to put not is blank because when the numbers are 0 in the numerator, it's going to be empty anyhow. And I hit enter. Now I have each line divided by the total of this column. And I'm going to make it %. And there we have our number. Again, we are using earlier only to learn about earlier. Already we wouldn't do this as a calculated column. We would do measures, and even as a calculated column, we would do other ways to avoid earlier if we wanted to. So the purpose of using earlier here is to understand earlier better. So for each line, for example, I am on this line for country code, let's say 860, I have this much oil production. It is going to divide this oil production over the sum of the oil production for 2010. Okay, great. That was our third example. We are going to see our last example. If you have liked the video up to here, please subscribe to my channel. It helps me a lot for my coming videos. So let's dive into our last example. You see in our table, each line has been studied certain date, department study date. So it means that this data has been gathered through study on a certain date. What we want to know for a certain country code, if I take the filter out of year and I put to certain country code, let's say 24, I want to see what is the next study date for this country. I see that I have gathered information for this country for this year. There was this oil production. I want to know what is the next study date for this line. So this means that on 9th April 2021, I have studied the data for this line. What is the next date for this country that I'm going to have a study? How we can do that? We are going to create another column, this new column. Let's call it next department study date. And we are going to say calculate minimum. We are going to say minimum date of the dates that we are going to scan. What we have to provide for this function is to have our second context so that when I'm on a certain line, I'm going to provide this date and I would want to compare this date to the column of date and I would want to get the next date. So this date is going to be scanned against this column, considering that we keep the same country. Then it is going to bring me the next date, which means that it is going to look at all of the dates and what is the next date. So there will be many dates after 9th April 2021, but I want the minimum of that. So we are saying that minimum date department study we want to introduce our second context on the same oil table and provide the column of dates, which is the department date, department study date. I want this to bring all of the dates that are after our line of the date. And this line of the date, I am going to bring it with earlier. Earlier date department column. So up to here, inside this filter, for each line, it is going to compare certain value of a certain line against this column of dates. But the second filter that we want here is to be able to stay in the same country. And as we have seen it earlier, I'm going to again say filter. I'm going to go a line down. Filter the same table, oil stats. And I'm going to say simply the country to be the same as our previous context. And now we are good. If I hit enter, and I'm going to make it short date. So here we see that the next study date for this country is going to be 2704 after this date. We can simply check this by going here. What is the date after 9th April 2021? 9th April 2021 is 27 April 2021. So this date is here. And for second line, what is the next study date after this line? We see that it's 8th January 2020. It brings me 23rd April 2020. We are going to simply check if this is true. 8th January 2020. The date after is 23rd 04 2020, which is here. So it's working well, and we see here it's empty. It means that we don't have any study done on this country after this date, which is 6/12/2021. And if we see here, it is our last date. Sometimes we need this kind of calculation, and with earlier, this is simple enough when we understand earlier. So this is our last example. Okay, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button. Don't hesitate to put comments or share this video with others. Please subscribe to my channel. It helps a lot. Until next video and new topic, take care. Bye.